Elizabeth Holmes.
Good morning and thank you. Well, afternoon. Thank you for sitting here throughout this. I've had conversations with your office and numerous others, and actually my domestic violence victimization study has made it to every state rep in the entire state of Connecticut. I don't live in the state of Connecticut because if I did, I would have been murdered by now. My lap screen score is extraordinarily high, and unfortunately because of the failures of family court, criminal court, and now juvenile court, my son's father, who's a domestic violence perpetrator, has never been held accountable for his actions. I won't go into detail as to what those include. My cases are pending, although my criminal court case where I was arrested for screaming, "Get your hands off me," has thankfully been nollied. I made over 30 court appearances between Danielson, Putnam, and Willimantic courts in the past year. What that means is I spent over 30 weeks in court preparing for court. I'm a pro se, because no one can afford 30 appearances by an attorney in court. And what I have learned is that there's a myriad of changes that need to happen, and I've seen it from both angles. I'm friends with a lot of men because I work in EMS, and I've heard the parental alienation thing from them, but I also have been accused of it myself. I've also been accused of Munchausen by proxy, both which are used across the board in all cases that involve domestic violence. It's usually the last tool that a perpetrator has to wield. I'll read you the end of this report, which is pretty exhaustive. It's 9 pages and includes an ACEs score, a lap screen. It's a very clinical tool. Extensive training is urgently needed by all systems that engage with this family. Their complete lack of understanding of domestic and family violence means that multiple families within the greater Windham County of Connecticut are at great risk for ongoing harm by domestic violence perpetrators because of inadequate system response. I've met 6 other moms in those 3 systems who are feeling the same issues, who are seeing the same issues. Lundy Bancroft deals with more cases out of that courthouse than any other state in the United States. Just that courthouse. The ACEs screening is imperative in family court. Understanding childhood trauma at a clinical level is necessary by every attorney, every judge, every family services worker, and none of them have ever looked at the ACEs screening for my son or really understood the imperative delicacies that my son is facing. He scores a 6. Guess how old he is? 2.5. That means he's at a 43% greater likelihood of developing a substance use disorder. He's also at a 6 times greater likelihood of committing suicide. Among a myriad of other health issues, stemming from diabetes to chronic heart disease, ACEs means a lot, and for the family court to register that understanding and to register that information would be imperative. A DV screening. We do financial screening. Why don't we do domestic violence screening? It's as simple as putting in 5 questions into that initial court document that you fill out when you file for a divorce. And they don't have to look like, have you strangled your partner or have you controlled who he talks to. It can be very subtle and it can still be very effective. Victimization studies like the 9-page report done from my family. It's imperative. You need to identify the problem cases first. 70% of contested divorces are domestic violence cases, and yet we have no screening for them. For those 70% that come through that are domestic violence cases that have a high likelihood of ending in death or serious consequences. And so having the victimization studies, once you've been able to screen them and identify them, you're able to go through and look at every type of abuse that has occurred. And I'm talking emotional abuse, exploiting male privilege, medical neglect, deprivation and isolation, economic control, monitoring and stalking, legal harassment, psychological torment, and I'm not done. Literally every type of abuse there is. It also identifies how I'm a victim, the lap screening, which is used by, or supposed to be used by police departments. It wasn't in my case. Life-generated and community-generated barriers. You have this in your email, all of you up there. And I highly, if you're going to read any part of it, read the community-generated barriers, because it's true in my case and at least 6 others that I know of. The final thing that I need in family court, that my son needs, that the 4,717 other children that have received domestic violence services through CCADB last year need, is domestic violence and stigma training in family court. Family Relations does 40 hours of annual training a year. None of it's domestic violence. None of it. Not a single hour is domestic violence oriented, even though 70% of their cases, right, 70% of contested divorce cases are domestic violence cases. Contested divorce cases go where? To Family Relations. So 70% of their cases they're not trained to handle, to adequately deal with. It's absurd. How are they supposed to give any sort of justice to these children? They aren't. They aren't going to. I bring you back to that 4,000 number. 4,717 children that received services through CCADV last year. That means their ACEs scores are high. That goes back to that 43% greater rate of substance use, that 6 times greater likelihood of suicide. We could start solving those greater epidemics like substance use. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and had my ACEs been adequately addressed earlier on, I don't think I would be a person in long-term recovery. I may never have dealt with recovery in the first place. So I leave you with that, and I hope that you look at Jo Meyer's testimony as well that was brought in. She did send a lengthy document. She's one of the only people that have studied domestic violence in family court, as well as bias in family court, and that's where some of my statistics come from.
Thank you for that. Questions? Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your testimony.
You're welcome.